some record now. So welcome, Suzanne and Matthew. How are we doing, guys?
Good.
I'm good.
Yeah.
I thought we could start by maybe if you guys sort of give like a brief thing about you, like what your background is.
All right. Yeah. I mean, introductions. I am a Dutch law graduate. I've got a bachelor's degree in international and European law. I've done a little bit of international criminal law. I know that you, Anton, are specifically interested in criminal law, but my main interest tends to be law and technology, intellectual property law, and the whole shebang around negotiating contracts and that sort of stuff. Okay. I've dabbled a little bit in all sorts of things, anything I pick up from my friends in the creative industry that they run into. I am versed in mostly Dutch law, but also European law. I've studied a little bit of UK law, a little bit of American law, and I've also had a passing interest in Chinese law. We've had a little bit of African law, and I've had a passing interest in Scandinavian law because that's also slightly different again. And also ancient Roman law is one of my favorite subjects.
The best laws. All right. Good stuff.
Ancient Roman law is bizarrely fantastical.
Yes.
And it's bizarrely modern. It is so weirdly modern. It is so strange.
Okay, that's cool. Matthew, for you, because Suzanne obviously already knows me.
Yeah.
My background is like philosophy and psychology, but I'm doing a PhD now, and like it's kind of like in homelessness and gender. But I'm also a researcher in like social justice and criminal law and whatnot. So
good topic.
Yeah, we kind of mesh quite well. So what about yourself, Matthew? What's your gig?
I'm a law graduate, and I did my master's in law and technology in Tilburg. My focus is internet law, IP. Also quite interested in changing like contracts and e-commerce. Sort of got a passing interest in kind of privacy and kind of the implications of privacy and the state in terms of cracking down on crime and terrorism. One of my friends from my undergrad is a forensic psychologist whose speciality is crime and more specifically counter-terrorism lately. So it's
awesome.
I am so jealous of that. That sounds sick.
Yeah, we have very interesting friends. I mean, my best friend also has an international European law degree, and she currently works in refugee help and migration law, and she is basically the person that helps kids who flee get their family to not get killed and get to a safe place. She does crazy shit. She has had to look at satellite shit to find the one prison in Tanzania that a kid's mother was held just from the description the kid gave.
It sounds like you like know enough people for a whole series of podcasts right there.
Yeah, no, this is, I think that we could do an interesting, if we just mesh our networks, we could do an interesting thing here.
Yes, we could.
Okay, well, I mean, I kind of talked to you before, so, but like, I thought it'd be quite fun just to start with, like, what do you reckon are some of the big debates within law? Could be anything really that people really gets people going, or it's quite controversial.
Well, first we're going to have to talk a little bit about law as a field, because I notice this with a lot of people. Most people tend to think, oh, law, that's crimes, and law, it's contracts, or it's something you want to stay away from. But law as a field is incredibly vast and incredibly segmented. So everyone who studies it has their own specialty. There's not really any general practitioners at least in Europe. In the US they do, because there's just a general law degree you get and a general test you do to become a lawyer. But
it's garbage.
Yes, but in Europe
controversial.
It's quite segmented. So here you would never ask an IP lawyer or a data lawyer like Matthew to comment on criminal law unless it's something that's sort of adjacent to data law.
Piracy for instance.
Piracy is something he'd be interested in, but also stuff like copyright infringements or people probably identification fraud, misuse of data,
counterfeiting products as well. That's an area I've dealt
so
with.
That's so those are things that are slightly adjacent and you do work with. In general,
that you wouldn't really consider like the everyday person wouldn't even necessarily think it's that connected, would you? Like that sort of things. But
I think one of my law professors from my undergrad put it best, that one big thing with law is that it interferes with our lives on a daily basis, but we tend not to think about, like when you go to a shop, you enter into a contract to buy goods, and sort of most people won't think about it like that, but that's how law interferes with our everyday lives and things like that. And so every day you're kind of doing something in regards to the law that you'll never actively think about. You may end up trespassing, a victimless trespass, for instance, when you're walking across private property that you're actually not allowed to be on, for instance, but no one's actually enforcing anything against you, for instance. So
it's my criminal law professor once said that criminal law is basically the shiny starlet of the law kingdom, because everyone knows it, everyone knows something about it, everyone thinks they know everything about it because of TV, but most people don't know fuck about it. And
carry on.
Nobody knows anything about all the other fields of law, but criminal law is still fascinating, and in the end a lot of other fields of law do end up having avenues into criminal law because it's your ultimate remedy. If someone really doesn't want to listen to you, it becomes a crime.
Yeah, I mean, what I find quite interesting is like you have all those laws that kind of like are explicit, like what you're talking about, right? Ones that are actually written and codified, and then there's all those other kind of more less tangible laws as well. You know, like kind of like the basic laws of like sort of like social contract. You know, like when the way that we like behave with each other.
The philosophical underpinnings of law in many ways.
Yeah.
That as a society we agree to abide by these rules that we've set out.
Yes.
Yeah.
I had two fascinating terms for that. When it comes to law, there is from the definition in international law of habitual law, which is actually potentially binding in that field of law, because getting all the countries to do the same thing is nearly impossible, especially if you try to write it down. So they use habitual law way more than any other kind of law does. And their definition, there's two definitions to deciding whether or not something is law. And it has to be a general practice, so everyone kind of agrees that this is how you do things, and people have to feel bound by said law. So they have to feel that they have to do it that way because that's the way you should do things. And being bound, there is two ways that can express itself. And you have the concept of being internally bound. You follow the law or you follow the rules because you feel that's the right thing to do, or you agree with the rule, or you agree that's the rules and that's how we play this game. And there's externally bound, and that's when you have to enforce things. And the fascinating thing with criminal law is basically a lot of people think the only reason nobody is doing crimes or nobody is breaking the rules is because we have harsh punishments, and that's why you don't do it, because you might get caught. But really, most people just agree that, no, I shouldn't steal things from other people, and no, I shouldn't stab someone when I'm angry.
Yeah, really, it says more about your kind of worldview, really, as opposed to the laws. You know, it just so happens that they kind of tend to mirror them most of the time. So it's okay.
There's the other concept in legal philosophy, which is about the main question about whether, if a law is unjust or immoral, should you follow it? Is there an imperative to follow the law because it's the law? Or if it's immoral or unjust, then we should, by virtue of that, break that law in order to try and make a more just world.
An immoral law is not a law. Well, there's interesting fields of what I just said. Dura lex sed lex is a Latin term which means it may be a harsh law, but it's the law. So that is the expression that most people have when it comes to the law. Oh, but you follow the letter of the law, it's written down, and that's what we have to follow. It's positivistic law. It's written down, so and we have no other option. Well, especially after the Second World War, there was an incredible discussion about should we follow laws just because they're written down, because Nazi law was incredibly immoral in
Really?
many ways.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Go figure.
What was it?
Nothing they did was illegal under their own law, technically.
Yeah, it's
Technically not under international law to a point either.
There's the other concept of the rule of law, which is that everyone should be bound by law and that laws should be fair and just. And the amount of writing on the rule of law is huge, and we could be here all day discussing the relevant literature and all that.
I was considering putting a load of my books in the background. Most of them are this thick, but I decided not.
Thomas Bingham.
Oh, he comes prepared.
Supreme Court judge as well, or former Supreme Court judge. He's dead. There's another version of the term, which is the rule by law, which is essentially the perversion of the rule of law, which is that, or essentially the law essentially is just an extension of the will of the state and therefore can be as arbitrary as they want. Thus, most dictatorships are deemed to be that rule by law rather than the rule of law.
Yeah, authoritarian regimes really love legal positivism because it basically tells them, oh, yeah, but we've written this down, and as long as the rule is made by a body that can make laws, it's a law, you have to follow it. End. Doesn't matter what it says.
There's no arguments that I like more than circular arguments. They're just...
Well, there's the other problem of the natural legal philosophies who say there is somewhere out there a perfect just law that if you sit down and think hard enough, you can find it and you find justice, and that's what the law should be. And our written laws are just an imperfect approximation of said law. Interestingly, natural law philosophies aren't just the people who say, oh, no, law has to be just, but it's also canon law. So all religious laws also follow this idea because law comes from God, who we don't know, but he has this perfect idea of the law. And if we pray hard enough or think hard enough, we'll find it, we'll approximate it. Our laws, our human laws, are just an imperfect reflection of what God wants. It's the same argument, only a slightly different perspective. But those ideas of law always consider that justice, whatever their concept of justice is, has to be connected to the law. And if a law is unjust, you do not follow it. But that then depends on your moral framework. Is it Sharia law? Or is it our modern idea of equality and fairness, or social justice, or the Chinese idea where the group and you have Taoism, which is more about putting the needs of the many before the needs of the one, etc. What is more important?
It's very similar to the Roe versus Wade question in the US. Is you have this idea that, oh, abortion is immoral, but what about the rights of the privacy of the individual, which is all the thing that Roe versus Wade is based on.
And the autonomy of the body.
Yeah, and so at the end of the day, the whole attempt to override Roe versus Wade is all about putting the right judges who believe Roe versus Wade was the wrong decision into the US Supreme Court, and after that, those judges will make what I think is the greatest atrocity of the US Supreme Court is that it's politicized, and therefore they are to make a decision where it's to satisfy that kind of moral worldview where abortion is evil, or women shouldn't have the right to make that decision. And that is a scary prospect in comparison to, say, the UK Supreme Court, which recently said, yes, the government in this country cannot act unilaterally in certain matters. And there's been this whole public outcry about, decision was too political, but it was all about the Supreme Court serving as an actual check against the powers of the state, and therefore that leeway of the impartiality of the judges, how judges are selected, also very fundamental to how the law and its moral framework exists.
Well, I think as soon as you start talking about like evil or purity, you're getting into that like that moral like absolutist kind of thinking.
Yes.
Yeah, but
It doesn't work.
It's also one of the big problems in this whole discussion is that morals change, ideas change, society changes. One of the big things that we're dealing with right now is the whole Me Too movement and social justice, and especially when it comes to violence against women, sexual abuse, sexual crimes, etc. Women are finally speaking up, but at the same time, this is a generational thing. I mean, women 50 years ago wouldn't say anything because that was not done. The whole framework, the whole moral framework was different. Of course, I mean, if you read literature from the Victorian age, the ideal woman was meek, quiet, listened to her husband, and did her marital duties. She had a passion, so being expressive, having a strong will, being fiery, or saying no, or telling your husband off, that was a terrible thing. That sent you into spinsterhood, and spinsterhood, that meant you were wrong in every way. If you weren't married by, actually, if you aren't married by 26, you're no longer a spinster, you're a thornback. It's fucking amazing. You get an upgraded title. But the idea was, if you don't marry young, if you don't get any children, you are not good and you are amoral. And in a world where women had zero rights, they were basically, they couldn't even have their own money or make their own shopping or decisions. Then it makes sense that, you know, men get to decide what a woman should be, and what man wants a woman that tells him off if he does something wrong. Nobody wants somebody that does that.
One of the most shocking things is, like, in the UK, I was just checking something because I was like, we only actually abolished marital rape in this country, not being an offence. So marital rape is now an offence 30 years ago.
Yep. A lot of countries are very late with that.
Basically, it was legal for a husband to rape his wife up till RVR in the House of Lords, which was 30 years ago now. And that is a shocking thing. Like, when I went to law school, it was probably the most shocking case I had ever heard about, is the fact that it took so long to go, it's not okay for a man to rape his wife. And that is, like, again, the shifting of the times. Again,
and it's also,
a bit later,
but it's kind of the same when, you know, when they like decriminalized, being
gay.
Exactly, being gay.
Yeah,
like the same thing. You know, like there's like a cultural shift, isn't it? Where and then there's sort of like a legal lag time, and then it changes. It's kind of like,
but it's the thing is, the cultural shift happens in a certain demographic, usually in young people. The lag time of the law has to do with the fact that most of the people making the decisions are a lot older, and they don't believe that yet because they are from that older time and that older set of morals. And everyone gets nostalgic as they get older. They always think that it used to be better in the past, so they don't want to change things to this new way. And one of the most interesting things is, if you look internationally, I see this a lot now. One of the arguments I see online is mostly from friends who are vegetarian, vegan, or animal rights activist-ish, is that the whole crisis we're going through right now with the COVID virus is, well, if we just didn't eat meat, we wouldn't have this problem. And I just have to bite my tongue to not reply to them because, first of all, we have no right to tell China that they need to go fucking vegan. All of us here in the West going vegan will not stop this problem because it's not us, even if it's not coming from our meat production, because we've got very strict rules, we've got everything sanitized to the point that we're actually creating bacteria resistant to antibiotics, etc. We've got everything very tightly controlled. But in a country as China, which is years behind in these sorts of developments, where a grand margin of the population still doesn't have anything that's modern, still has to make do with whatever they can find to eat, where meat is still considered a luxury. I mean, for us, it's normal to eat meat every day if we want to. But even for your grandparents, meat every day, that's something that rich people did. So in China, there's still this idea that being able to eat meat every day is something to aspire to, because that's what rich people do. That's what the wealthy get to do. It'll take a couple of generations for them to realize, maybe it's not that good. Or, oh, wait, now the thing that rich people do, that rich white people do, is go vegan.
Which is weird.
Why,
it's like,
no, but that's why we aspire. That's why a lot of people aspire to it. Why? Because a lot of the stars are going vegan. It's that same psychological thing where it used to be that being pale was a marker of status because everyone had to work outside. So everyone who was tan, everyone who was tan was somebody who had to work outside. Everyone who was pale as fuck was rich enough to not have to work outside. Now it's the opposite, because everyone works inside and works very hard, and the people who can afford an expensive holiday to the sun get a tan. These things have to do with these cultural shifts, and there's always a legal lag, but there's also a lag throughout the world. So countries aren't going at the same rate.
Yeah.
And what we in the West tend to do, especially people who are very activistic, and I get it, they want to make a better world in their idea of what a better world is, but they can't cut a little bit of slack for countries that just haven't gone through that process yet.
It's also part of the sort of what I call the Middle East ally problem, is you have Western countries who preach human rights and go, oh, Iran or Syria, oh, human rights problems. But then they look at Saudi Arabia and it's like, nothing to see here. And like Saudi Arabia itself has loads of human rights issues.
Saudi Arabia is
and sort of extremely arbitrary crimes. And there are places that a lot of people I know who have sort of made it and make a lot of money now, they like go on holiday. They've like gone on holiday in Dubai, and I'm a bit like, but why do you want to go holiday in Dubai? Like a lot of the stuff there is still very backwards law-wise, and human rights violations and things like that. But it's like, oh, but it's exotic and it's things like that. And they're saying, oh, but these are our important allies in the region and things like that. And so the concepts of like what the kind of European, the concepts of justice and human rights, there's sort of almost a hypocrisy in many ways where we're like, yes, we must uphold it, but let's go make an arms deal with Saudi Arabia, who'll be using the weapons to, say, commit war crimes in Yemen. And so sort of the international standards and arguably the hypocrisy make sort of a lot of changes in the law that we're sort of trying to achieve seem very trivial in terms of the world stage.
This reminds me a lot of people going on holiday to South Korea. And it was a couple of years back that North Korea. North Korea had opened its borders for tourists because the country is poor. They need goddamn money because people are starving. Let's let the fucking idiots come and have a look-see, shall we? And there was this American tourist who had gone to North Korea and then thought, because he was an American tourist and American tourist thinks that everything is safe to the degree that it is in America.
Is this the US citizen who was like pretty much beaten into a brain dead coma and pretty much died?
That guy. Basically, what he did is he went to North Korea on holiday as a student, I think he was like a 20-something, and he decided to nick a street sign.
Yeah.
As irresponsible 20-somethings do in the United States. Over here, harmless prank. If you get caught, you get a fine or maybe told off and you go, oh, I'm sorry, I'll learn, sorry. This is North Korea. He got nicked. I think he even tried to bring the street sign with him as a tourist, as like a souvenir or something.
Yeah, he tried to take it out of the country and he got arrested.
He got arrested and basically put into a gulag. And of course, it's North Korea. They don't care about human rights. So he didn't get treated very well. And he got beaten to the point that he ended up in a brain dead coma. The US finally managed to get him out because I think they also gave him like this insane, like 900-year sentence of hard labor or something like that.
I think the US also transferred some North Korean spies over or something.
They basically only managed to get him out when he was a vegetable to die in the US. And the thing is, this is another one of those super hypocritical things. I'm like, why would you want to go on holiday to a totalitarian regime that literally imprisons people for leaving? Why do you want to go on a holiday there?
Well,
why?
Have you not heard of like dark tourism? Because it's huge right now.
No, I've heard of dark tourism, but then you're aware enough not to nick a street sign.
Yeah, but right. Do you not think kind of like with like sort of like social norms in general, it's hard to escape your own
bubble.
Yeah, exactly. So you wouldn't necessarily question it unless you were in a situation where it didn't make sense. So
yeah.
So being an sort of like entitled American tourist, I'm not remotely surprised that he went there, and yeah, I can't take that. What do you mean? That's crazy.
No, it's also one of the things that fascinates me the most is that people who start to study human rights, they all go in as these very idealistic, activistic world changers. We're going to make the world a better place, and I'm going to do human rights law, and that's going to make everything better. And then they actually study the system and realize exactly how futile it is.
That was me going into law school at 18. I was very idealistic. I wanted to do human rights and criminal law. Quickly had that beaten out.
I mean,
criminal law not my strongest subject, but it was fascinating, but not my strongest subject. And I ended up just going, I'm going to pursue the money. But at the end of the day, I've sort of recently been rethinking concepts of justice and the wider concepts of law, and kind of even in contracts there are the concepts of justice and ensuring equitable outcomes still apply. Same thing with IP,
the whole concept of consumer protection law is basically based on consumers do not have the skills or the money to defend themselves from predatory contracting parties, from commercial parties. They are basically sheeps left to the wolves. We need to protect these weak little fuckheads.
Yeah,
it's like the entire idea.
I mean, to be fair, these contracts are not written in language that most regular people could interpret.
It's also like me and Suzanne have discussed before with companies contracting with each other, like in the UK. Yep. Any company of any size, if they contract with the other, they contract with the other at their own peril. They agree to whatever terms are provided and whatever's negotiated, and whatever liability that brings, it's on their heads. But like in the Netherlands, I think you've mentioned to me about sort of this whole idea about the balance of the parties and size of the parties and who's the more powerful party in that contractual relationship, which sort of does a much more concept of justice and equity in terms of business relationships than say in the UK, where it's just like the contract is a sacred document and all justice will come from that contract. And so sort of the differing views from different countries on justice and kind of how things should be done is quite interesting as well.
It's something that's very difficult for me, that I know that UK law and American law have a concept called the Four Corners Principle, which basically means that the only thing that's binding is the text as written in the contract, nothing else. This is what it is. That's where that incredibly complicated, long sentences legalese comes from. While in the Netherlands, we have a concept called redelijkheid en billijkheid, which basically means reasonableness and fairness. And it basically means that the judge has a stick to break and open anything they deem unfair. And they can just go, you know what? No, that doesn't apply. We're scrapping that. That's unfair. We're redoing that, or you're renegotiating that. We find that against the law. And this is so ingrained in Dutch contract law that it's in everything. I mean, it is your catch-all. If there's a problem, if there is something that seems unreasonable, it's the way that the law stays flexible. Like right now, the whole problem with all contracts basically not being built for a world where there's a pandemic and nobody's doing anything, but nobody is to blame. We're going to fall back on that, and we're just going to look, Is it reasonable for parties to share liability here, to just share the burden of the damages, or is it more reasonable to let a richer, bigger, more professional party carry more of the weight of this, or the party that has insurance, they should carry the brunt of it, etc. There's a lot of things in the Netherlands that you cannot exclude liability for by contract, because it would be unfair. The whole
Under my
idea
training, this is both terrifying but fascinating to me.
Yes. And for me, the other side is terrifying but fascinating. But because for me, the whole trope in movies of people signing their soul away because they didn't read the fine print was weird. Because in the Netherlands, that would not fly. But here, in the UK and the US, especially in the US, it does. I mean, in the Netherlands, if you have a conflict about a contract, you also get to look at things discussed during negotiations, documents from that period, documents afterwards, documents on the side. It's about the intent that people had making a contract. And if the text doesn't reflect that, well, we'll go with the intent. Well, in the UK, the idea is the contract is a distillation of the intent, and if you didn't put it down right, that's your own damn fault. And that's terrifying.
Yeah, all those like 400-page like user agreements that I never read.
Oh, I do read user agreements, but that's because I am a lawyer.
Most,
well, not a lawyer, but
again, most user agreements, depending on circumstance,
you can scroll them.
Yeah, most, in my view, most of them would arguably be just invalidated by consumer law in the UK, because we do actually have a good tradition.
In the EU.
Yeah, but like in the UK, we do have a good consumer framework in place anyway. So again, it just depends on context. So if it's definitely a consumer piece of software, for instance, consumer rights apply. If it's a commercial software package and you're contracting it as a company,
you're fucked.
It's on your head.
Well, even here, there is some leeway there. If you are a small company and both companies have terms and conditions, which is usual, and there is no agreement on which terms and conditions apply, then the smaller company's terms and conditions automatically apply, because they are the weaker party, so they get to use theirs. But that's also a thing. What if both companies have terms and conditions, they're roughly the same size, they didn't agree on whose terms and conditions they're going to apply, but they conflict? Then what?
That is an interesting discussion to have.
Yeah.
It raises us many points. But yes, justice and contracts.
Justice and law.
It pervades every part of law. Like people go, oh, commercial contracts, oh, nothing to do with justice. But there are kind of concepts that just underlie it, and it's always interesting. So
it's, even if you have the most unsympathetic asshole of a client who just wants more money, there is usually something to find that makes it justifiable because the other party is screwing up. My father is a tax lawyer, and he had a client who worked for an international organization. They have their own internal tax system. It's fascinating. They pay nearly no taxes. And
I've never heard the phrase tax system. It's fascinating in my life, but
oh my God, I will convert you at some point.
I've drunk with tax lawyers in the UK, and it's always,
it's so good.
It can come off a bit dry, but like, my God, they get to sit around most of the day just pontificating, which is just what you want to do when you qualify.
What my dad says is a tax lawyer is a person who can calculate with words. They can do math with words. Like you tell my dad a term and he can give you a percentage. It's incredible.
Right. So we're about to time out because it's a 40-minute limit if you've got 3 people. So when it goes off, just click on the link again and it'll
refresh.
Yeah.
I'll be back in a second, though.
So we're gonna go for a little break to grab something to drink then.
Yeah, cool. I'm going to do.
Cool. Right. That might be a good plan.
Bye.
Bye.